Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for episode 4 of the Paralympian Podcast. We have the reigning Paralympic, double world and Commonwealth champion Sophie Thornhill with us this morning. For those of you that haven't met me before, my name is David and I'm from British Blind Sport and we'll be hosting today's podcast. If I could firstly ask you all to mute your microphones for the duration of the podcast, and if you wish to ask Sophie any questions, you can do in one of two ways. Firstly, you can raise your hand on screen and I will invite you to ask your question directly to Sophie, and the second option is to submit your question via the Zoom chat service. Welcome, Sophie. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'd like to invite some of our listeners to ask any questions. So if you do have a question, you can pop that in the chat service like I mentioned earlier on. We do have a question that's come in from a young girl called Sophie. She's 10 years old, and she has asked what advice you would give to her, and some words of encouragement to yourself, maybe when you were a 10-year-old.
Hi Sophie, it's nice to hear from you. Thank you for your question. I guess for me, it's kind of when I was sort of that age, I loved sport, and I was just sort of threw myself into everything. And my parents are very much like, if you know, just go out and do everything. So that would be the first thing I'd say would, if you got the opportunity to do something, just throw yourself into it. You know, it's what is kind of that saying, you're only going to regret things you didn't do. You know, so the one thing I'd say is just if something comes along, you know, if BBS have got any days on or any sort of sport, or not even sport, anything in life, just throw yourself into it, because you know, even if it's not for you, you're not going to regret it because you've experienced it. And that was sort of the thing that I always did at that age. And I was really lucky that kind of cycling came along for me, and I sort of threw myself into it, and it turned out to be the sport for me. So yeah, that will kind of be just sort of give yourself every opportunity and throw yourself into everything. That would sort of be the thing that I'd sort of say to myself at that sort of age.
Some great words of wisdom there, Sophie. Has anybody else got any questions they would like to ask at all? If not, I can move on to some questions that we had submitted previously via Facebook.
Could I come in and ask a question?
Of course. This is Rosie, Sophie. So Rosie, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Sophie. You say we. Do you always train and compete with the same pilot, I take it?
Yes, traditionally, yes. Kind of over my sort of career, I've had quite a few different pilots. And kind of the pilot I've been with the longest is Helen Scott. And then we kind of got together in around about 2014 mark. And before that, I rode with Rachel James. And then in 2017, we also mixed up the partnerships within British cycling, and I rode with Corrine Hall, who is traditionally rides the back with Laura Packy. But yeah, mostly throughout my career, I've ridden with Helen predominantly. Before I got onto the squad, I had a fair few different pilots, and kind of the partnership that got me onto the squad, I was riding with Megan Boyd. But like I say, predominantly, you will pretty much always be with the same pilot. There can tend to be a few kind of trials to kind of see who is the best pilot if there is more than one, which can always be a bit of a grueling task kind of for everybody. Kind of it's always a tough being part of a trial. It's quite a strange experience. But yeah, predominantly I've ridden with Helen mostly, but I have ridden with other people. It's always quite fun changing pilots, because people ride bikes differently, so it's quite interesting to kind of see how other people ride bikes and getting used to their kind of mannerisms on the bike. It can be quite a tough experience, but it's quite fun at the same time, because it sort of changes things up a little bit. But yeah, I've always ended up coming back to Helen and myself. We've sort of been, that's the partnership that's been really successful for us both.
And do you have any advice on, I mean, I'm not a cyclist, but I wouldn't mind, it's something I wouldn't mind getting into. Do you have any advice on finding pilots? Because I don't have people I can,
Yes, that's what kind of really hard. But there are kind of organisations out there. The British Cycling are very good for kind of helping you find kind of facilities or pilots and stuff. So my advice would be to get in touch with British Cycling. They're really good at kind of setting you up with people or a bike if you may need it. So yeah, kind of British Cycle would be the place to go. But also, if you do know anybody who cycles, just ask. You never know. They might be really interested in getting on front of the tandem and taking it for a spin. You never know.
Yeah, great. Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for your question, Rosie. My next question for you, Sophie, is sort of based around your achievements. So, as mentioned, you've won Paralympic gold medals. You've won, I believe, 15 world championships in total, and you've been awarded an MBE as well, along with your Commonwealth medals. So what was your biggest achievement personally?
It's always a good question, that. I think it's a really good one, because every medal means something different. You know, every medal's got its own backstory. Every medal and every race has got its own little kind of thing that makes it special. But yeah, kind of picking it out would be sort of almost too tied in with the challenges with it in my career. I guess it would be kind of the Rio gold, which was just unbelievable. You know, even without the comeback, it's something that kind of is the pinnacle of a cyclist career. It's the pinnacle of most sports careers to go to the Olympics or Paralympics and win a gold or any colour medal. You know, it's the pinnacle of our career. So to kind of to have that, you know, in the locker is something that is really amazing. And it's something that, you know, kind of teammate of mine, Neil Fakir, said, no one can ever take that away from you. You've always got that medal now, and you will always be, whether it be now or in 50, 60 years' time, you'll have always been Paralympic champion, which is something that's pretty amazing to sort of say to yourself sometimes, because within sport, you can get sort of wrapped up within the next challenge and the next race. So to kind of look back on it and think, actually, no, it's okay because I have been Paralympic champion is something really important. And then I guess kind of the 2020 World's Just Gone would be kind of the second, just like I say, for my kind of little personal comeback with the injury and things. It just sort of something that kind of meant a lot to me kind of individually, because it just sort of summed up all the hard work that I put in and that it was worth it. And, you know, and it if you work hard enough, it will happen, you know. So, yeah, those are the two. I think the one medal that was kind of a standout experience for me, and isn't necessarily any kind of more special than anything else, probably the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games in 2018. We beat the Australians in the match sprint. So obviously our home turf, it sort of felt quite strange, but the reception that we got was unbelievable. You know, I've never performed in front of a crowd that big. Unfortunately, sort of paracycling doesn't get the big crowds, but within the Commonwealth Games, obviously integrated with the able-bodied events. So to kind of get that reception and get that loud cheer was just something that was incredibly special. So that'll always be one little moment in my career that I'll always remember.
It's amazing. It is always sort of the small things that have the biggest impact on someone's lives. You know, and there's no better feeling, I suppose, than going halfway around the world and beating a particular team in their own backyard. It's always good, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, definitely. It's a little bit quite sweet.
Yeah. So I'm not sure, obviously, if many people know, but you chose to make the decision at obviously 24 years of age that you wanted to retire from competitive cycling. You know, most people would have probably said you were still at your peak and, you know, there was a lot still to come. But what was the main reason for sort of finishing to compete competitively and sort of stepping down?
So I've recently announced my retirement, and it sort of came out with after the postponement of Tokyo, which should have been on holding camp for the games right now, actually. And obviously they've been postponed because of coronavirus. Yeah, I was intending to retire and go to university after these games anyway. So for me, when that postponement came around, a decision had to be made. But obviously, because I don't ride, I'm not an individual sports person. I'm on a bike with somebody else. I'm part of a team. That was a very difficult decision for me to make. but ultimately I had to make the right decision for me. And the reasons behind that decision was sort of partly tied into kind of the mental battles that I'd have having an injury. But I also was finding it very difficult to handle the nerves and the pressure of sport, of elite sport. And kind of, because we've been so successful, gold medals were expected from us. And, you know, it wasn't even kind of a question really. It sort of felt like if you don't get a gold medal, you've had a failure of a World Championships. And that sort of pressure was sort of not why I got into cycling. I got into cycling because I enjoy riding my bike, and sort of elite sport should have that pressure. Ultimately, that's sort of part and parcel of elite sport. And when I first started, I sort of thrived off that, and I really enjoyed the nerves and kind of the pressure of going out there and performing. But kind of sort of recently, in the last couple of years, so it has, like I say earlier, tied into kind of that kind of battle I had with kind of being injured and having that comeback. It's just sort of got a little bit too much for me. It just took away from why I ride my bike, and it wasn't something that I enjoyed. Some people enjoy the pressure, and like I say, I used to thrive off it. But for me, it just sort of got too much. So I had to make that decision. What was right for me, and I'm really happy to say it's right for me. Sort of, it has felt like a weight off since I'm retired. Nice, in my own head a little bit. But yeah, so that's kind of the predominant reasons. So yeah, but I am excited to sort of start university soon. I actually got all the information and sort of enrolled yesterday, which was quite exciting. So yeah, so now I'm sort of excited for the next chapter. Sad to say goodbye to the kind of the cycling chapter, but it'll always be there, and I can always ride my bike now. But yeah, I'm excited for the next one.
It's absolutely brilliant that you're going to, you know, spend a lot more time focusing on your education and your future, because sport has given you so much. You know, you have to put that time aside, don't you, for yourself sometimes. It does sound selfish, but yeah. So I suppose this leads on to my next question. So we spoke how you're going to go back into education, but in terms of like your downtime, so when you weren't competing, or, you know, when you're not going to be studying, what do you like to fill your time with? You know, you've mentioned a little bit of FIFA and things with your partner. Are there any other activities that you sort of take part in regularly?
For me, I enjoy kind of the PlayStation. I'm a good box set person. I'm actually making my way through Modern Family at the moment, which is a bit of an interesting one, so I'm enjoying that. But yeah, kind of generally that's sort of something that kind of I've always enjoyed, but haven't always necessarily been able to do too much of because of sort of being a cyclist. I love to kind of be in the outdoors. My nana and granddad own a farm, so I sort of almost sort of grew up on a farm a little bit. So I sort of love being in the outdoors and walking. So sort of since my retirement, I've been able to sort of fill my time a little bit more with that, which I really enjoy. I sort of was able to do it over the sort of past few years with cycling, but with one eye on recovery, you know, it's sort of something that kind of I sort of take a little bit of a backseat. But yeah, so I sort of love being in the outdoors, going for walks, I love a little bit of camping as well. So yeah, kind of just being out and about for me is kind of is the way I like to sort of fill my time. Sort of I like to sort of be a little bit lazy and sort of play a bit of PlayStation. I think that comes from recovery is king, as being an elite kind of athlete. It's sort of that gets drilled into you. So you're like the little amount of steps you can do as possible is a good rest day. So I think that's been drilled into me. Yeah, so yeah, kind of a little bit of both. I like to be a little bit lazy, but also I like to sort of get out and about as well.
No, that's lovely, and you know, spending quality time with those family members and those loved ones, you know, make big memories, I think. While we're sort of a little bit on the subject of your recovery, you said obviously that you'd like to chill out and relax and be as lazy as possible, but you know, nutrition and things are a big part of recovery. So did you have any sort of rituals or things that you followed in terms of your recovery, or, you know, superstitions relating to pre-events, etc.? At all?
Kind of nutrition side of things, kind of for us, we kind of never had anything kind of too dramatic. We had obviously a nutritionist who would help us out with stuff, but she was very much kind of like, look, you don't need to kind of be the extremes, you know, you can still have a little bit of chocolate if you want it, you know, kind of, which is not good because I love chocolate, so that was always my downfall. But yeah, kind of for us nutritionally, sort of everything as everything in moderation. It kind of was the thing for us. Kind of you always think, oh, cyclists, oh, you must eat a lot of carbs, you must eat a lot of pasta. But for us, being sprinters, it was always very much about the protein rather than the carbs. So very much kind of nutrition. Our kind of meals are based around how much protein we had in a meal, and how many meals you should have with however much protein was kind of the main focus for us. Kind of that was kind of the key for us, is to kind of make sure kind of recovery after sessions and preparation for racing was getting that key amount of protein. So that was kind of the focus of our nutrition. And then stuff in and around that was kind of a little bit sort of more kind of, you had a little bit more freedom with it. You know, you didn't have to kind of, you know, if you wanted to, the nutritionist would write out a food diary for you, eat this, this, and this, and when. But you know, you didn't have to have that, and predominantly, kind of most people were quite kind of independent with how they wanted it. But yeah, kind of nothing kind of too strict for us. But yeah, kind of just with that key focus of protein.
Yeah, protein are the building blocks of all of our bodies, really, aren't they? So
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
help your muscles recover and grow. I actually have a question now from my colleague Alex, Sophie. So I'm just going to hand over to Alex.
Hi, Sophie. I've got a bit of a personal training question. So I have reluctantly signed up for a triathlon in September.
Oh, God.
For charity. And cycling is not one of my stronger disciplines, especially when I hit an uphill slope. So I was just wondering if you have any tips for battling some uphill slopes, whether that be physical tips or mental tips, because I sometimes do think it's my mind that talks me out of the hills more than anything.
Oh yeah, honestly, I'm with you though, Alex. I hated hills, honestly. It was the worst bit about being on a bike, so I'm completely with you. For me, yeah, I agree with you. It's the mental side of things. I think predominantly you kind of look ahead and you see your steep hill and you're like, oh my God, how am I going to get up this thing? And I think it's kind of, for me, what always worked for me was like splitting it up into sections, almost kind of like, right, I'll get to that lamppost. And then you get there and you're like, no, I can get to that lamppost. Does that sort of make sense? Sort of splitting the whole thing up. And then kind of like physical tips, it sounds ridiculous, but use your gears on your bike. I was always guilty for it, falling into the trap of just getting in the gear and just staying in it. Whereas kind of, you know, you need to use what you've been given with your bike. You know, make sure you're using those gears. If it's a flat section, kind of knock it up to a harder gear so you can sort of, you still want to recover on the flatter bits or the sloped bits, but kind of use that to get a little bit of momentum to take you up the next kind of steep bit, and then kind of flick back down to kind of help you sort of spin up the hills. So yeah, kind of mentally try and break it up, and physically really kind of just try and use your gears and pace your effort. Is nothing worse than just as soon as you get to the hill, like getting out the saddle and like 2 minutes, then you're like, oh my God, I can't get up the rest of the thing. One of the old classic sort of slow and steady. Just don't kind of commit yourself early on, and yeah, that'll be my tips, to be fair. But I'm with you, I hated hills.
Brilliant, thanks. I'll give that a go at my next training session. Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you for your question, Alex. I just wanted to put an opportunity out there for some of our listeners to ask Sophie some more questions. So if anyone does have a question, please unmute yourself and fire away.
Hi, Rosie again. I just wondered what you were planning to study at university and if it was sports related.
It's not actually. I'm studying history. History is always something that I've really loved, kind of alongside sports. So sort of sport and history have always kind of been my kind of areas of interest. I've loved history ever since sort of school, really, and it's always something that I've been really interested in. And kind of, if I'm reading a book, it probably tends to be kind of history related. So yeah, so I'm doing just kind of history, nothing specific yet, so not modern or ancient or anything yet, just kind of general histories at Manchester Met, starting in September. So I'm really excited. Kind of, it's always sort of been another area that I've sort of really enjoyed. So yes, I'm excited to get cracking with it.
Wow, good luck.
Thank you again, Rosie. My next question for you, Sophie, is sort of if you could go back in time and relive a single training moment or competition moment from your career, what would it have been? Because I know briefly we picked up on like those little things like in Australia at the Gold Coast Commonwealth Games, but when I think back to my time as an athlete, it was the little silly things that used to, you know, be the biggest sort of things I'd laugh about or recall during games or training sessions. So
yeah, that's a good question actually. Yeah, like I say, I think it's the little bits, you know, you always remember each race or kind of each big thing, but it's the little things sort of being part of a team. The one that always it sticks out to me for no reason really, other than the fact that it was just funny. We were doing a training session on like a closed circuit, so which allowed kind of me and my kind of fellow stokers, sort of BI athletes, to kind of get on our solo bikes, which, as you can imagine, is a bit of a recipe for disaster. But because it's a closed circuit, it's okay. So we were having a little race that sort of myself, Neil Faki and James Ball were having a race. It was part of the training session. We were supposed to be having the race, I will say. But it's almost like a little chicane, almost a little bit in the circuit, and we like to think of ourselves as F1 cars when we go around this. It sounds ridiculous, but yeah. So we got to the chicane. James got to the chicane first, and there's also a bush near the chicane. So James was going a little bit too fast and sort of forgot to turn. It sounds ridiculous because they were supposed to be professional cyclists. He forgot to turn, so basically just went straight off and straight into the bush, which was quite. That was kind of, for some reason, it's just the fact that it's just a bit stupid. Is kind of the things that sticks out to me. But yeah, like you say, it's those little bits. It's just the funny moments that you've got with your teammates and kind of that little, like I say, you remember all the races and you remember those bits, but it's sort of kind of the little things. I always remember with the West World Championships, we had a big game of Risk going on, which was quite cool, that we played in the evenings. So yeah, it's more those sort of little bits sort of behind the scenes that you sort of don't really see, I guess, which is probably the fun bits, yeah.
I suppose as well, when you link back up and get in contact with some of your old teammates and training partners, those sort of things crop up quite frequently, I imagine. Oh, do you remember when so-and-so did this?
Yeah, exactly. They're the bits you talk about, aren't they? That are just those funny bits that could happen anywhere. Yeah, definitely.
I suppose many people wouldn't imagine that, elite level athletes would do things like that, because it would be classed as a danger to themselves or a risk of injury.
Yeah.
But it is nice
we
to know that.
We're the worst for it.
I'm just going to open up and ask our audience if there's any other questions before we close for today, Sophie. So if anyone does have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and fire away.
Hi, Sophie. It's Neve here.
Hi.
I'm just wondering if you compete in any other sports, apart from for cycling, or.
Would you say that again a little bit? Sorry, a little bit broken up.
You compete in any other sports?
Oh, no, I don't. I'm just cycling. I've always loved sport, ever since I was a kid. So I used to do a lot of different sports as a kid. I used to love football. I did a little bit of athletics with British Blind Sports. I used to go to the kind of days that they put on. I did a little bit of kind of the blind football as well, or the British Blind Sports. And I also did judo at the local judo. So yeah, no, I don't compete in any other sports, but I've always loved it and always sort of throw myself into other sports. So yeah, so kind of when I was younger, I used to do all sorts.
Great.
Thank you for that question there. If anyone else does have a question, just before we finish our podcast today, this will be the sort of the final opportunity to ask that question.
Actually, just wondering as well, like, how did you find retraining at home during the lockdown, or involved in much sports yourself, Sophie?
Yeah, so kind of training in lockdown was a very kind of strange experience for us. It's kind of, we were very used to kind of being, you know, at the velodrome, in the gym at the velodrome, and on the track at the velodrome. So kind of having to kind of adapt gym sessions for home. We were lucky enough that our gym managed to kind of get a little bit of equipment to everybody in QH, everybody kind of, and we managed to kind of train on the bike at home quite a bit, which was good. We use a platform called Swift, which is really good. Sort of set your bike up on a turbo, and you basically like on a virtual road. So we could do a lot of training on that. So yeah, it was quite a weird experience. You know, it's quite kind of, it was sudden for us. We thought we were going to have like another couple of weeks before we kind of, the velodrome was shut. Because the velodrome was shut just before that kind of sort of nation went into lockdown. We thought we'd maybe have another week. So it was quite sort of like sudden. We had to get equipment to everybody. Everyone was scrambling around, trying to get everything everywhere. So it was quite a strange experience, kind of having to adapt it. And sort of training from home, I found almost quite difficult, because it was weird sort of trying to train in that environment that you're used to, kind of as an area to kind of switch off from training, an area that you kind of used for recovery. So kind of having to have that same kind of place as the kind of your training venue, I found kind of quite tough to sort of get motivated for my training, really, which I know quite a lot of the other team found as well, because you weren't sort of with all your teammates and sort of within that kind of training facility. It was quite strange and weird to kind of get motivated for it. So it was a fun time, but a kind of a strange one as well, kind of for everybody, because obviously none of us have ever had to kind of deal with this before. Nobody has. So it was quite a strange time, but yeah, it was good.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you for that question, Liam. Thank you very much, Sophie, for joining us today, and you've been fantastic.
I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
You've given us such a great insight to, you know, your sporting career and, you know, the mind of an elite level athlete, some of the things that you've had to overcome personally. If anyone does have a question that they would like to ask Sophie that didn't get the opportunity to do so today, if you'd like to email it across to myself, David at britishblindsport.org.uk, I will pass that on to Sophie, and she'll do her best to get back to me, you know, before she sort of studies and goes on her next venture at university. I do apologise again if anyone didn't have that opportunity to ask a question, but please join us on the 28th of August for our next Paralympic podcast, where we've got former Paralympic athlete Roy Smith joining us. So thank you everybody again for joining us, and thanks Sophie, you've been great.